This is not my favorite biblical text. In fact, it's pretty far from it. It's certainly not one that has ever inspired me to say, wow, I should preach on that. But here it is in our lectionary for this morning. And so, as I usually do, I started to engage with it. I started to read the text over and over again, even after 3 times reading it in morning prayer, just hoping against all hope that inspiration would strike. And you know what? There was this one image that kept coming into my mind every time I read it. That image was toilet paper. Yes, you heard me right. I kept thinking about toilet paper, and not because, in my very considered opinion, this is a stewardship passage that is about as useful in preaching as toilet paper would be. Rather, it was because of this theme that Paul hits upon in his text. The theme of need and abundance, or to put it differently, scarcity and abundance. Paul writes, I do not mean that there should be relief for others and pressure on you, but it is a question of a fair balance between your present abundance and their need, so that their abundance might be for your need, in order that there may be a fair balance. He's articulating this vision of a community, a world, where we share things that we have in excess with those who don't have enough of those particular things, trusting that others will share with us those things that we don't have enough of. He's articulating a vision of a community, a world, where there is a fair balance, such that no one goes without, and no one gets wrapped up in fear and greed. Which is how I got to toilet paper, or rather, the lack thereof. Remember all the way back in March when we really started to get into the swing of the pandemic, we started to be on lockdown across the country. Remember that very strange thing that happened where people started buying all of the toilet paper, like there was some sort of toilet paper drought that could last for years and years and years. Remember the news footage of shelves laid bare by shoppers as if it were Black Friday in 1996, and we were looking at the place where the Tickle Me Elmos should have been displayed. This is what I kept coming back to as I was reading Paul. And I kept coming back to it because this was the antithesis of the vision that Paul articulated. This was the very embodiment of fear of scarcity. And it didn't make much sense, at least to me. After all, we weren't headed into a hurricane. Governors made it clear that you could still go out to the store, and toilet paper factories and trucking companies weren't shutting down. In fact, toilet paper companies even made commercials telling us as much and encouraging us to share. But then the fear of scarcity really often doesn't make sense, at least not on the surface. Let's take the church in Corinth as an example. If you think back to what you might remember from Paul's first letter to them, there is at least a subset of the congregation that's pretty well off, which makes sense given that Corinth's status as the capital city of the region, a hub of commerce, and a center of the arts. Some of the members of this church would have had an abundance. But once more, reflective of the city, there would also have been a sizable portion of the congregation who were poor. They would have experienced significant scarcity. In Paul's first letter, we learn that those with an abundance aren't doing a great job of sharing that abundance with members in need. In this second letter, we learn that the congregation is perhaps not doing a great job of sharing its abundance with others in the broader community who have need. And while I take serious issue with the flat-out manipulative way that Paul encourages the Corinthians to be more generous, perhaps we can all understand his frustration at those with an abundance failing to share. It's sort of like that moment that you find yourself in the grocery store watching a mother with 3 children staring at an empty shelf with desperation, the kind of desperation that makes it clear that they are on their last roll of toilet paper at home as a family. And you see this knowing that somewhere there is a single person surrounded by 12 bulk packs of toilet paper that they bought last week. So what's behind it? Why do people do this? Why do we, on occasion, do this? Of course, one answer is quite simply greed. For some people, it is just about having more and having the most, even at the expense of others, or worse, for their own profit. Those would be the people who buy all the toilet paper and then sell it back at the price that is 10 times the market rate. Sure, that exists as a real force in our society, but I would hazard a guess that that is actually not the primary motivator for this behavior. We might ask why the wealthy Corinthians didn't share. After all, the system was designed to help them profit because they were already wealthy. Not unlike our economy, it was there for their benefit so that they would keep getting richer. So why not give to others out of that abundance? Well, if I were in their shoes and I saw just how much suffering there was among those whom the economy exploited, not unlike our economy, I think I would be afraid. I think that I would be afraid that with one snap of the fingers, I might find myself among those who didn't have enough. After all, the economy wasn't built to provide an abundance for all, no matter what people might say. What if suddenly I'm in the out group? What if suddenly I lose my status? With that kind of fear, I think that I would want to keep resources to myself too. Just in case the worst happens. And that's the problem often with a strictly capitalist society. Just as there's this myth that anyone can become successful if only they try hard enough, there's also this fear that anyone could lose anything at any moment. And that doesn't bring out the best in us. That doesn't bring out our most Christ-like selves. When it comes to the toilet paper, I think that there's even another level on top of that. Not only are we immersed in an economy that engenders fear of scarcity, we're also plunged into this moment of global crisis. We are in a quarantine, worried that at any minute someone whom we love might die. And we have no idea if our lives will ever be able to return to something that we recognize. We have no idea if the world will ever be okay again. What if everything changes? What if we change? What if there is no resurrection, no abundant new life for us? What if, and I know this sounds crazy, but what if global supplies of toilet paper just dry up completely, no matter what commercials might say? What if there was never toilet paper ever again? Now, that last one might sound a little bit tongue-in-cheek, and it is, but I actually think that it's a pretty good representation of what goes through our subconscious when we find ourselves buying 120 rolls of toilet paper. The point is change, fear, anxiety, grief. These are all woven together, and they all move us to approach the world from a sense of scarcity. Often, they actually prevent us from seeing the abundance that is right in front of our eyes. And that leads me back here. That leads me back to all of you and the community of Dickey Memorial. For you as a congregation, there is certainly a lot going on right now. You're separated from one another because of COVID. There have been 10 or more deaths associated with this congregation in one way or another. The church finances are pretty tight. The buildings are, to say the least, problematic. And on top of all of that, your pastor is leaving. There is so much change. There is grief. There is anxiety. And at times like these, it's really easy for congregations to feel like they do not have enough. It's easy for congregations to wonder, what if this is it? What if there isn't a resurrection for us? What if there isn't new and abundant life for us? What if we actually do close? I get it. I really do. But earlier this week, I met with the chair of the Committee on Ministry, or COM as it's better known in the PCUSA world. It is the body of the presbytery that oversees pastor-parish relations and helps churches through times of transitions. And the chair wanted me to tell him about you so that he could do the best job possible in serving you. What's funny is that the first thing that came to mind was not actually Dickey Memorial itself. It was a lecture from seminary. The lecture had been an extracurricular kind of thing, an after-dinner event with a guest speaker. And it was the first time that I remember someone holding up Ephesians 4 as a good model for what pastoral ministry should look like when it's healthy. That's the passage that basically says that God gave some people gifts to be apostles, evangelists, prophets, pastors, and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry in order to build up the body of Christ. I remember after that lecture coming to the firm belief and goal that if I were to do my work as a pastor well, I would be putting myself out of a job. That is to say, I would be equipping the saints so that they wouldn't necessarily need a pastor, at least not all of the time. Certainly, they wouldn't need a pastor to thrive. That became my conclusion, but that became my goal in ministry. Maybe it's not so funny, actually, that was the first thing that came to my mind. When I started telling the chair about you all, I found myself talking about just how gifted you are as a congregation and just how little you really need someone like me to live into God's call for you. Now, I don't say that in a self-deprecating way. I don't say that in a way that says that it isn't wonderful to have a pastor and I haven't loved working with you, because I have. It's actually something that gives me really great joy to say. You have incredibly talented lay preachers. You have wildly creative minds who are willing to craft and lead worship. You have people who are generating new ideas for groups every day that will help everyone stay connected, but also help them to grow in this wild time. You also have those people not during this wild time, by the way. You have strategists and organizational thinkers. You have hearts burning with a passion for justice who are willing to push the work of anti-racism forward. You have dreamers and visionaries who are imagining what the future of this congregation might look like. And you have planners and project managers who are ready to put that vision into process. You have encouragers who are diligent in their care for this congregation. You have so much. And even if you didn't find yourself among the categories I just listed, you have a gift too. This congregation is so gifted. You do not need me or any other pastor to thrive. You are already thriving, and you already have the abundance that you need to continue thriving. My dear friends, in the weeks ahead, it will be easy to think that in order to have a fair balance as a congregation, you would need a pastor to provide for your needs. That your abundance, perhaps, would be limited to your welcome and care for a new minister. I would challenge you to instead think of the abundance and the need that Paul talks about as already being here, already being contained in this community. I would challenge you to find the fair balance by living into the gifts that you have to equip, encourage, inspire, comfort, challenge, and guide one another. I would challenge you to find the fair balance by sharing what you have, whether it's the vision for a future or a sermon or a phone call or your leadership of a group or some baked goods put into a care package or so many other things that others might find as an abundance that they need. I would challenge you to do this so that others might find their abundance in you. I would challenge you to experience yourselves the way that I have experienced you. I have experienced you as a community that overflows with God's love and welcome, one that heals broken hearts and imagines new beginnings, and at every turn proclaims, you are a cherished child of God, accepted, beloved, and so much more than enough. I hope that you can see yourselves the way that I see you. Thanks be to God.